Today is Monday, November 4th, and Matt is here with us. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Nima.
Matt, let's start with what's going on right now in the Middle East. And how do you find the Iranian position right now? Are they gonna attack Israel, or it's just about some political gesture?
Uh, Based upon the Iranians in the past, Nima, I would say it's probably more of a political gesture. You've seen this before, particularly say with the Americans. The Iranians are good about being wise and mature, and you know, uh, understanding the realities of force, capabilities, capacity, and the real dangers of getting into a war with the United States. What benefit comes from it other than saying you stood up to the United States and now your ports and everything else and airfields and civil institutions, everything's been bombed. So I think it's more of a gesture, but same time too, we're in a different place here. I mean, we're a year into a genocide. We see the Israelis actively taking on Iran's allies, trying to defeat the axis of resistance one at a time. So for the Iranians to sit back and say, okay, this is, we're going to let them defeat or not defeat, but we're going to let them diminish and degrade Hamas. And then they're going to try and do the same to Hezbollah. And in a year from now, where are they going to move on to? Syria? Are they going to move on to Yemen? So we're seeing, if we've got a fist essentially of the axis of resistance, we're seeing the Israelis taking it one finger at a time. So, for the Iranians to sit and to watch that, same time too, if you just kind of concentrate on Iran's relationship with its allies, it's probably most effective not engaging Israel directly. Because if Iran is engaged directly with Israel and the United States, then it can't support its allies as fully as it can if it's not engaged directly. So for the Iranians, the best strategy may be, again, even though you are allowing the Israelis to take on the axis of resistance one at a time, if the axis of resistance is not ready at this point, which I don't believe they are, to fight as one unified force, right? One true alliance, say, and there is moves within the region to make it into a real alliance. And you have the confidence that you have the backing of Russia and others, but you're not fully confident in the sense that that's what we really need to go up against the American empire in all this. Then the idea then is that, okay, our strategy should be, and we see as well too, to tack one more thing onto that perspective or that analysis the Iranians may have, is that our strategy against Israel, this longer term approach, is the correct strategy. Although it allows the Israelis to go up one-on-one with our allies, at the same time too, Israel is exhausting itself. And so this idea of Israel constantly being at war, constantly being on edge, having to deal with 100 rockets a day, which is not enough to defeat them by any means, but it's enough just to continue that bleeding out. And that overextension, the exhaustion of the IDF, the just continual degradation and cost to the Israeli economy, the weariness that this can potentially bring on the Israeli public. We've not seen that yet, but it can. Foreign wars always have a political cost, as well as too the chaos that this is stirring within Israeli within Israeli politics. Right now, of course, we see how that is in a sense that it has kind of solidified Netanyahu's governing coalition. If there were elections today, that governing coalition would most likely be back in power. But you keep hearing all these warnings from within Israel itself, from senior officials either speaking off the record or from, say, retired generals speaking directly, that this is an existential issue for Israel. These political tensions are going to be the undoing of Israel. This is what you hear the Israelis saying. So if you're the Iranians, okay, maybe that's the best bet, because if we engage directly with the Americans and the Israelis, then we can't fully resource, we can't fully support and supply our allies like we can do now. So, I mean, it's a dilemma for the Iranians, and then as well, too, you have the other issues of the Iranians having to deal with the domestic political pressure on this, as well as the regional political pressure. You saw when Israel launched its campaign against Lebanon in September, you saw reports of Lebanese saying, "Where are the Iranians? They're the ones who are supposed to be our allies. Where are they? We're the ones getting bombed, and the Iranians are, so there's also that type of political pressure that is very real. And if Iran stylizes itself as the defender of the Muslim world, it has for 4 decades now been a bulwark against American imperialism in the region. Well, okay, when are you going to step up and do something, right? I mean, because you always have to prove yourself. You always have to prove yourself in this moment. It's like the American baseball player Babe Ruth famously said, "Yesterday's home runs don't win today's ball games." Right? That's great. You sent missiles to Israel on October 1st, but it's now November 4th. What have you done? So there's all this. So it's hard to say, to analyze it and say, come away with a clear picture of what the Iranians will likely do, because there are various options for them. And those options have risks, potential consequences, but also benefits to them. But we'll see. Certainly, I mean, I think if you're writing a novel, they'd launch an attack tonight just to highlight the American elections. But this is the real thing for the Iranians as well, is that knowing that the Americans' attitude towards this, the American role in all this may change. You and I are talking at 2 p.m. Eastern on Monday, the 4th. So 36 hours from now, the American, the White House's view of what it can do in the Middle East may have completely changed. And so the Iranians, I think, wiser and more mature, waiting to see what happens. But yeah, I wish I could give you a more straightforward answer than that. Of like, yeah, it's clear the Iranians need to do this, or it's clear that if they do this, A, B, and C are going to happen, and that's why they're not going to do that. Yeah, I think like a lot of us, we have to like the world, including those in Iran, those in Lebanon, those in Israel. We have to wait and see.
Right now, Matt, in Washington, who's in charge? Where is Joe Biden? We haven't heard from him. We don't know any of these officials. They don't talk about recently. They don't talk about what's going on in the Middle East, because we've been witnessing in the southern part of Lebanon, they're just attacking civilians, just civilian infrastructure, and they're talking about Hezbollah strongholds, and nobody knows how do they know that, and how did they discover that those are belong to Hezbollah, and just destroying the same thing we've been witnessing in Gaza. Right now, the same type of strategy. They're trying to destroy everything.
Yeah, and Gaza, the reports coming out of Gaza, I realize just that long explanation or I was trying to give about Iran, I leave out the Palestinians. And it's essentially because, the Palestinians who've endured this genocide for a year, and the reports coming out these last month or two out of the north of Gaza, it's the worst days. The worst days of the genocide are happening now, which is so hard to believe and accept, but that's the case. But the Palestinians get left out of these discussions, of this analysis, of these conversations, not because we're heartless or we don't have empathy or we don't care, but because the Palestinians really don't have power. And I think the White House, that's just to explain why the Palestinians have been left out of the conversation like this so far, and how, regardless of what's chosen to be done by any of the actors in the region, the Palestinians are going to suffer until the Israelis and the Americans decide they're no longer going to suffer. This is Thucydides, right? The strong do as they want, and the weak suffer as they must. And this is the case for the Palestinians. Certainly what we're seeing with the White House, the absence of Joe Biden, I don't think anyone is surprised by that. Can you imagine how would that campaign have been possible at all, right? If he had continued with it? I mean, you can't even imagine it. But who's in charge was your question. And it seems, it is an American imperial state that has its own inertia. This is what is called the deep state, and that's a deep state's a term that goes back prior to 2016 in those elections, but it also is, so it's something that whose name has become highly charged and I think really misunderstood. But it's this idea that the particularly the national security state is composed and is structured in such a way that uh, with a $1 trillion a year budget, it has its own inertia, and it's going to continue forward. It's going to continue with the policies that are best for the imperial state because that's the way the structure is. And so, literally, you could have, or you could have the senior executives, White House and Security Council, all the folks in the old executive office building, just go away on vacation, and it's going to move forward on its own. Okay. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing this idea that what is occurring in Gaza is a fait accompli. That it's the worst days are happening now. There's nothing anyone in DC is going to do about it. They couldn't care about doing anything about it. They made the political decision months ago that their calculation was that staying in the good graces of the Israel lobby is more important than winning Arab and Muslim American votes and winning progressive votes. And that was the calculation they made, and they've been living with it. Harris making some desperate attempts from the podium to ameliorate that or to mitigate that. All that said, that was the decision that was made, and we're seeing it's become rote. It's just become mechanical. The U.S. role with Israel at this point. There has been PR attempts, most audaciously, I think, most just a blatant political move. The letter put out, supposedly sent by the U.S. to Israel 3 weeks ago, saying you've got 30 days to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and that just was a political stunt prior to the elections. And now today we see that Israel has essentially torn up the contract with UNRWA, with the UN Relief and Works Administration, the people who actually provide the humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, not just in Gaza, the West Bank, but also in Lebanon and Syria, Jordan. But it doesn't matter that Joe Biden's not around. It doesn't matter that Jake Sullivan, I guess, has the con. That Jake Sullivan is who you point to be like he's the guy guiding the ship, but it really doesn't matter because this thing, the inertia of the empire is continuing on its own, and until something occurs that threatens that, you're not going to have a change. So until you have a point where the United States is in the Middle East and there's a massive economic shock that has political consequences to the ruling party, or the fact that other priorities are now being dwarfed by the Middle East. So if you had, for some reason, that they decided that Ukraine, Eastern Europe was going to be a bigger priority, which it's not to them, but to say it was, okay, we cannot engage with Iran right now because we have to send our Patriot and air defense missiles. We got to send them all to Ukraine. We can't send them to the Middle East, et cetera, like things like that. So it's a pretty bleak position that we're in here. What we're looking at. I don't think anyone who's objective about this thinks that the election tomorrow, whatever the outcome, is going to change much with regards to the U.S. relationship with Israel. I think what you're basically looking at, say, for Gaza, is you may take it to the extreme with Donald Trump, and he allows Jared Kushner to go over to Gaza and build, condominiums on the beach there for settlers. You may have that where under a Trump administration, a resettlement of Gaza occurs. Under a Harris administration, maybe it's limited to simply just a military occupation, right? But those are the two poles. And it's likely that whoever's in office, whoever's in the White House, Harris or Trump, it's going to be somewhere in between those two poles, because those seem to be the poles under which the Israelis are operating either. It's either some form of military occupation or some type of full resettlement. And the answer is going to be in between those. And I don't believe that a Harris administration would be much different than Trump in terms of the Israelis' decision on what they're going to do. The Israelis are going to do what they want to do here, regardless of who's in the White House. So I think, of all the issues, as consequential as I think maybe this genocide may be for the Democrats' chance to keep the White House, as well as to win or lose down ballot races. The reality is that for the Israeli perspective, in terms of the Palestinian issue, particularly in Gaza, I don't think it makes any difference. It may have an issue may have an issue impact on how they handle Iran and other things, but yeah, I mean, I think that's where we're at.
In your opinion, right now, how do they feel, the Israeli army? How do they feel about their operation in southern part of Lebanon so far, in your opinion? If you were part of that decision makers in Israel, what do you see in the southern part of Lebanon in terms of their operation?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the objectives we know was for them to clear southern Lebanon to the point that Israeli settlers could move back into northern Israel to prevent Hezbollah from launching rocket attacks onto northern Israel. Now, whether or not that was a real objective, whether or not that just simply was the political public relations rationale put out there to allow for this invasion of Lebanon, I think that might be right. I think that's maybe where people, because there are multiple reasons for them going into Lebanon. I think to answer your question about if I was in the IDF, how would I feel about it? And okay, try to put myself in that position. I think if I would be concerned about the overextension of the Israeli Defense Forces. I'd be concerned that we are a reserve army now going into our second year, of combat operations. We are taxed, we're overextended, our equipment's breaking down, and we are pursuing a purely political objective that doesn't have strategic benefits behind it and may not be achievable. I would be heartened if I was an Israeli officer in the sense that the Israeli ground incursion has been limited. It's not the invasions that we saw in 82 or 06, right? And so it has been limited. The casualties we've taken, there have been Israeli military casualties, but it's not been nearly what it could be if we had pushed Hell Mel or, up towards the Litani River. Had even gone beyond that, had put 5 full divisions in, right? And just, launched an actual, again, a replay of 82 or 06. So I think if I was an Israeli officer, I'd be pleased about that. At least we are taking a limited approach on the ground here. We are trying to limit our casualties. We are pursuing, and we are primarily dropping bombs as our main tactical and operational way of war here. So we are getting engaged on the ground, but for the most part, we are fighting to our strengths, and we are fighting Hezbollah the way is best for us and not the best for them. I'd be pissed because we were in Lebanon, right? Because this idea that we're trying to achieve a political goal that, again, doesn't have a strategic reality behind it. So we are, even though our casualties have been limited, and there have been some, but have been limited, what's the purpose of those casualties? What are we even doing here? I guess it depends upon how where I am on the spectrum there, in the sense of, do I believe in the purpose of our presence in Lebanon, the Israeli military presence in Lebanon, as actually getting the settlers back into their homes in northern Israel? Do I believe in establishing a buffer zone there? Am I some type of nationalist or Zionist who believes in expanding Israel, greater Israel, whether it's for military purposes or just metaphysical reasons, or the religious historical reasons, or what have you? That would all factor into how I felt about it. But I would be, if I guess to summarize all that, if I was an Israeli military officer, I'd be pleased that it was limited as it is, but overly hesitant because the purposes doesn't make sense, as well as the fact that it's costing us a lot and we're bleeding out. Our country's bleeding out in a number of ways. But that's why I'm sitting here talking to you. And I'm not, I'd be, gosh, if I'd stayed in the U.S. Marine Corps, I'd be, my going my 27th year. So, but like, certainly that's why I'm not, in that uniform anymore either, and that's why I'm on a show called Dialogue Works, because the reality is whatever we say about what the Israelis are going to do, whatever we think what they're going to do, whatever, how we feel about what they're going to do with regards to Lebanon or anywhere else in the region, the reality is that it's not going to come to any type of conclusion that provides for the security and stability of I'm not talking about the region or the Lebanese or the Palestinians, but the Israelis themselves. The only way Israel, I know this is trite and it's cliche, it's been said over and over again, but it's because it's true. The only way, if I was an Israeli army officer, I would have to have this understanding or come to this understanding. The only way my country is going to have security and stability is through political negotiations, is through answering the grievances of these people that we are fighting, most of whom are fighting us out of acts of resistance to occupation. So, I mean, having that understanding, I don't know how many within the Israeli the IDF officer corps have that understanding, but I have to imagine there's at least a few.
Matt, how do you see the position of International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice right now? What else Israel should do to finally they come to a solution, to a decision about what Israel is doing? And because if they go after some sort of decision about what Israel is doing, it may change, it may shake the international community even more.
Yeah, I mean, the ICC and ICJ, they're necessary. We need them in this world. I think we have to, the idea that we don't seek to have international institutions to solve these problems. I mean, this is what the men who won World War II understood, right? That we have to create these institutions. We have to have this international law. We have to have this capacity to resolve these things and to hold accountable those who commit these acts. Otherwise, we're the 50 million killed in World War II will seem quaint in the next World War. And that's a very real, something staring us right in the face right now. I'm a big fan of the author T.H. White, and he has this quote that says, mankind's destiny is to unify. If we fail to do that, we'll eventually become monkeys again in the trees, throwing sticks at each other, and that's essentially what we're looking at here. I mean, I think you look at South Africa and the case it brought against Israel for genocide in the International Court of Justice, which is the world court connected to the United Nations. This is a court that anyone who's a part of the United Nations belongs to as a part of being a member of the United Nations and of accepting the United Nations Charter. So its jurisdiction is universal, and its jurisdiction and its validity is certain. The hypocrisy, though, we see. So you have South Africa leading this genocide case in the ICJ. 30 countries have joined on with it. But, you just look at South Africa, for example, because there's other cases that are made about this. But, South Africa leading this genocide case, but they're also the largest supplier of coal to Israel. So even when you look at something, you say, man, this is the right way it should be done. This is what, this is the way, the path forward we need to be on. There's always that hypocrisy there. There's always that corruption. There's always this idea that the dollar is the most important thing. And so, you wonder, what's it all about? What's it all to become? And even if the ICJ, however long it takes, it delivers a verdict of genocide, and then refers their verdict to the UN Security Council for action. Well, first of all, the way it's set up right now, the Americans will veto anything and nothing will come of it. But then you even look at the sincerity of it, though. Well, if the South Africans who are leading this genocide case in the ICJ are still selling the Israelis the coal that they need, if South Africans haven't cut off that trade yet, or at least conditioned it in some way or done something, then what do we actually expect is going to happen here, right? And it becomes, all right, is this kind of like we were talking about before with what's the purpose of Israel putting its troops into southern Lebanon? Is it about to make, what's the purpose of killing Hassan Nasrallah? Was it to make Bibi Netanyahu's poll numbers could go up? Because they did. What was the purpose of saying the tying the war in Lebanon to the war in Gaza for the Israelis so publicly, the way that Netanyahu and the Israeli government did back in August, when they say, the fourth goal of this war is to get our people back into their homes in northern Israel. So essentially saying that getting the Israeli citizens, settlers back into their homes in northern Israel is on the same level as getting the hostages back from Gaza. Okay, what's the purpose in that then? I mean, is this essentially just going to be about continuing this war until until the next election? And I mean, so you look at this and you say, what are the actual purposes in any of this, and what are going to be the real outcomes in any of this? And so it's easy to get dismayed and despondent about it. But at the same time, too, we have to recognize that that is the path forward. Using international institutions, adhering to international law, holding people accountable is the only way forward for us, because the other aspects is, like White said, we're going to end up, back in the trees like monkeys throwing sticks at each other, which is what, a third world war would reduce us to.
I said, where is Joe Biden? But we can argue that where is the European Union right now?
All of that, right? The yeah, I mean, the hedging on this, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Certainly there are the pressures that the Israel lobby, just to call it that, uses throughout the world, but most especially in the West, and incredibly so in the United States, but then also too, to a high degree, in European states. That's deliberate. That's not accidental. We spoke about this before. This comes as a result the way the Israeli lobby works. Their brilliance at it, in terms of being able to pressure politicians, pressure NGOs, pressure media, is breathtaking. And it comes out of the 1980s, the response by the West, including the Americans, to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, and the Israelis saying at that point, like, we can't allow this to happen again. We can't have American politicians saying that Israel's wrong here. We can't have American television channels, newscasters, pointing out that Israel is in the wrong. Very successful effort by the Israelis to manipulate and control public opinion, just to call it that, in the West for the last 4 decades. And even as that's now being undone, primarily because of the type of technology we have now, lets information to get around that type of control, that type of censorship, the Israelis and those alive with them will evolve. They will adapt to it. Right. And people have seen this already in terms of the way that the social media companies censor themselves, right? In a sense that the use of anti-Semitic accusations. So people who protest in the United States or in Europe against Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people, they are labeled as anti-Semitic. And that allows then to get around free speech and free assembly laws, right? Because these people, they're not out there protesting against war. They're out there practicing and speaking hate speech, So you see how adaptive they are and how they evolve. And I think for those of us who are opposed to them, we have to understand that, that when this genocide ends, and again, it will end when the Israelis and the Americans decide it will, with the Israelis really being, I think, the lead decision maker in that, there will be something else afterwards that we'll have to try and stop. And if we don't understand how they operate, how the system operates, how the empire operates, and how it evolves, then we'll be in a very bad position.
We've learned that 52 countries demand an arms embargo against Israel. And when you look at the list, it's China, Russia, Vietnam, Mexico, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Egypt, Turkey. And Do you think that would influence the policymakers in the United States, or they don't care the rest of the world? How do they feel about what's going on in the
Oh,
Middle East? In Gaza?
they don't care, and the Israelis for the most part don't care about that embargo because those countries weren't selling weapons to Israel, or at least the weapons trade between those countries was not so great. There's potential for there. You know, you could see why wouldn't anyone think that the Israelis and the Russians would sell weapons to one another? Of course they would. You know, and the same eventually as the Chinese military industrial complex grows, which it is, and which is a creation that we should all fear, something that we forced them to basically build. As that, of course they will. Of course they'll settle each other. But at this moment in time, they're not. And so they're primarily concerned about the Americans, the Germans, certain European countries, because some of the European countries, while their trade in weapons with the Israelis is small, it can be quite critical components. So it may be like the famous example, or the is Holland, is the Netherlands, with spare parts for the F-35s, right? So total dollar amount, actual volume of the trade, not that great, but the widget that the F-35s need to keep flying comes from a warehouse somewhere in Holland. That can be quite crucial. But the the Israelis, as long as what brings about South Africa's downfall, to go back to the 80s again, what brings about South Africa's downfall is those sanctions, is that blockade on South Africa, is the international pressure that isolates the South Africans to the point that essentially it's just the United States and Israel standing along South Africa. And then the pressure within the United States gets so great that the Reagan administration has to even back down from that. And at that point, that's the end of it. That's the end of South Africa. The Israelis have constructed a system for themselves to prevent that. They saw what happened to the South Africans, and they have constructed an infrastructure, a presence, or built upon what was already existence, because the Israel lobby was for decades have been functioning quite well in the United States. Ran into issues like I was talking about before about the way their 82 invasion of Lebanon was received. But certainly if people were interested, go and read about how the Israel lobby influenced the United States in those early days of the United Nations when Israel was being created. And it's quite powerful even then. And then as things change, the lobby adapts, right? They evolve, which is how most things, even things that are leviathans, even the American empire, will adapt and evolve to ensure its survival and its success. So the Israelis understand that this isolation could be real, and so they're one of their focuses is on maintaining the ability to survive such an isolation. And so it's understanding again the hypocrisy of these states, not exposing it, not talking about too much. So you have this issue with, say, the South Africans providing, again, leading the genocide case in the ICJ, but the also selling the most amount of coal to Israel. I'm sorry if you hear my dogs. The fire trucks are going by, and they're trying out for the fire department as well. Yeah, so this will last about a minute or two. Yeah. Oh no.
Matt, do you want to add something, or
I can't hear you.
okay?
All right, hey, Alex, Billy. Hey,
Do you want to go there and?
what's that? It should stop in a moment. There you go. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Matt, we've learned that 2 more B-52 bombers are heading towards Al Udeid Air Base. With these new bombers that the United States is sending to the Middle East, do you think that they're telling Netanyahu, go whatever you want, you can do whatever you want in the Middle East, we are there to support you, or is not that?
I don't think it's enough. So they're told now 6 B-52s in the total 6 B-52s in the region now. A couple more tankers. They sent. I couldn't tell the way that the reports I was reading. An F-16 squadron went there last month, and an F-15 squadron went there in the last week or so. I couldn't tell if those were just replacement squadrons. So if they're just rotating the squadrons out, I don't think they're additional squadrons. And the same thing too. The Abraham Lincoln is getting set to depart the region. The Truman will come in and backfill her, but they're not extending the Lincoln. If they thought things were going to happen, if they planned for things to happen, then they would have kept the Lincoln in the region. It'd be clear that these were not just replacement squadrons of F-15s and X-16s, but actually additional squadrons. The same with the B-52s. I mean, 6 B-52s, yeah, they can carry a ton of cruise missiles, 6 B-52s, but that's not as many as you would think that they would put in the region, particularly maybe not so much in the Persian Gulf, but certainly in Diego Garcia. In the Indian Ocean, far enough removed from Iran to protect those aircraft from Iranian strikes. That's the issue with these bases for the Americans, whether they're air bases or naval bases, whether in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, wherever else, Jordan, that they run the risk of those countries run the risk of facing Iranian attacks. And some of those countries have been clear that we don't want the Americans to utilize their aircraft out of these bases in an attack against Iran. So I think these B-52s, these extra forces, but again, I don't think they're extra forces, they're just replacement squadrons. The fact that they're maintaining those squadrons there, yeah, that says something. But if there was, I believe, plans for a great war, you would see more aircraft, more resources, more investment in this. I think the B-52s are more of a deterrent. And certainly you would see the B-52s, I think, again, out of like Diego Garcia or up out of England. A lot of times that's where they go because of just keeping them removed from the Iranian ballistic missiles. But we'll see. I mean, maybe they've sent those aircraft forward. We don't know about it. It's hard for them to do that. It's really hard for them to get away with that type of secrecy. But we'll see. We'll see. But, the idea that essentially what the Israelis need is a doubling and tripling of their air force. If they're serious about fighting Iran and doing damage to Iran and giving Iran, the consequences that anyone reasonably looking at this and saying that this was a good decision on behalf of the Israelis, then they need a doubling and a tripling of the Air Force, which is essentially what the Americans can do. The fact the Americans haven't done that, put that many forces in the region, makes you think that, okay, that's not what's going to happen. There's not going to be, again, this great war that we've all been fearing. Certainly it's right and correct to worry about that. And, but we'll have to see. It gets back to the first question you asked about what the Iranians are going to do. And, plenty of options for them. It's not clear. Certainly the Iranians have said things. The Ayatollah just yesterday said that we're going to retaliate for the attacks a week and a half ago. And it's going to be brutal, and it's going to be significant, and it's going to be final. Again, to your first question, is that just bluster? Is that just political posturing, or was he serious? I think, the concern, of course, is what happens with these elections. How does the White House feel about the elections? What do they want Joe Biden's legacy to be? Do they want, if Harris wins, do they want the Harris White House to have to start a war with Iran or to inherit a war with Iran? If it's a Trump White House, do they want the Trump White House to be the one who starts that war with Iran, or do they want to be able to, they don't want the Republicans to say, look, the Democrats wouldn't do this war, so we had to do it ourselves. I think those are the conversations, those are the calculations, again, all political in nature, that are going on and have been going on within the White House. And, there's certainly military dimensions to it, but, in strategic dimensions to it, but the politics, always trumps everything in this.
Just to wrap it up, Matt, do you think we have two candidates right now? Donald Trump in his first and wanted to withdraw US forces from Syria. And right now in Iraq and Syria, the United States has forces, troops there. Do you think that with these two candidates, are they talking about what would be the policy in Iraq and Syria? What can we speculate on what would be their policy?
Oh gosh, I don't think I've seen any questions about Iraq or Syria. I mean, most of the times, if there's an interview with either candidate and foreign policy comes up, it's one question, and it's about Israel and Iran, about maybe about Gaza, maybe about Lebanon, but it's more of a general like, are you going to keep supporting, Israel the way Biden has been supporting Israel? That's basically the question. Allowing the candidates to say, yeah, I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more than Biden, or I'm going to do the same, or what have you. Harris, interestingly, yesterday said she was going to, if she was elected, she would do everything she can to end the war in Gaza. No, I don't think anyone takes any of that with any degree of seriousness or sincerity. But certainly a question about Iraq and Syria. Good God, I mean, we've had American troops in Iraq for it'll be, by the time the next president gets sworn in, it'll be close to 22 years that we've had American troops in Iraq for. And as far as I know, there's not been one question addressing that. And in Syria, we've had troops in Syria since what, 2014. So now 11 years of American troops in Syria. They are being three soldiers were killed in Jordan back in January, but there's been dozens of American soldiers who have been wounded throughout this past year in both Iraq and Syria. The attacks are constant. Attacks on U.S. Navy ships in the Red Sea are constant. I mean, it's remarkable that both Biden in his debate with Trump and Harris in her debate with Trump both made these statements about how, for the first time, this century or whatever, no American troops are in combat, which is just a complete and utter and grotesque lie. And the major corporate media refused to follow up on it. You look at all the fact checks, and they fact checked 30 different things from the debate, and no one, USA Today did fact check that, and they had like this mealy mouth, like, you can look at it both ways kind of nonsense. When it's real, look, the Navy's awarding their ships combat awards, what's happening in the Red Sea. We've had troops being wounded continually. These troops are also not paying taxes because they're in an officially designated combat zone. I mean, like, everything's there. That this is black and white, guys. This is, there's nothing subjective about this. These troops are in combat. And, the media doesn't even want to discuss that. The fact that we do have troops it'll be going into the 23rd year that we've had troops in combat in Iraq, and just left out, so that ability of the media to ignore the reality of what the American empire is doing, what the American empire looks like, and what it looks going forward for the American empire, as well as how the hell did we get here, is an essential component of the media within the empire to, essentially kind of like Fight Club, right? First rule of the empire, don't talk about the empire. I mean, so I think we've seen that throughout this fact that, yeah, all the things I just said, how can this not get brought up? And if somebody, please, in the comments, if someone knows where Harris or Trump were asked about any of this, please post it, because I haven't seen it.
Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you, Nima.
Right now, in 10 minutes, I'm gonna have another talk with Larry Johnson.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, please say hi to Larry for me. Yeah, and sorry for the dogs and for the time change and everything else. We'll get it worked out.
It was amazing talking to you.
Yeah.
Matt,
all right. Thanks, Nima.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.